Okay, so in this lecture, I want to talk about utilitarianism and bad faith. And what this is a way of saying that utilitarianism seems like it can justify some actions that are obviously immoral or bad. You can tell a story, and with utilitarianism, it is far too easy to tell a story where doing some terrible thing has good consequences and is therefore justified. So, common charge is that it justifies immoral actions. And you can already see some of these things you might suspect. There's an example, when I was talking about doing versus letting happen, seems like utilitarianism can justify taking the job in the, working for the oil company, working for the chemical weapons manufacturer, biological weapons manufacturer. That seems like a thing you might not, should be able to justify. Working for, you know, evil law firm, so on and so forth. And in the story I gave you guys by Ursula Le Guin, this is a very famous sci-fi story. Ursula Le Guin is a deservedly famous science fiction author. Like I said, I read a lot of sci-fi, and I think people who know sci-fi would tell you that of 20th century science fiction writers, the really good ones, there's probably, the competition for the greatest is probably Ursula Le Guin, Gene Wolfe, and I don't know who else, right? Um, but this story is famous because it is a very good criticism of utilitarianism, right? It's short, it reads almost like a biblical parable, but it makes the point well. And the point is this, there's a couple here. If you are a good utilitarian, it is not only justifiable to lock this kid in a basement and make them suffer horribly their entire life, it is the morally right thing to do. Le Guin writes about these people who see the child suffering and they can't stand that they're part of it. Again, we've already seen for utilitarianism with the stuff with like the oil company or biological weapons, they can't make sense of that. So it's not just that we should shut the child up in this room and make her suffer or him suffer their entire life if somehow this leads to greater happiness for the city. It's that people who object to it and leave, they aren't doing something principled, they're just doing something stupid, according to the utilitarian. Why leave the city and make yourself unhappy? You're not helping the kid. That just decreases happiness. None of this makes sense to me. This becomes even worse when you think about the emphasis on probability. If you are a good, utilitarian who thinks in terms of expected utility, it could be even easier to justify torturing a child like this. You could say, well, there's at least a 1 in 100 chance by locking the kid in the room, we are saving 1,000,000 lives 1,000 years down the road, so got to torture the kid even though it's probably for no good reason. A utilitarian like McCaskill or Bostrom or Beckstead would, I think, have to say that. Now, what they would say in response is, I think, this. It's like, look, Le Guin is telling us some sci-fi story. Yes, it's a nice little parable. But, the problem is she never spells out exactly how the happiness of this beautiful city of Omelas depends on the suffering of a child, right? Looks like it's just magic in the story, right? Look, and in her story, you get this weird, horrible answer. In the real world, tell me how torturing a child like this is going to have the best consequences. You know, they'll say, look, you have sketched me a weird, weird case, and a weird, weird case gives you weird answers. Not any real objection to my theory, right? Yes, Le Guin has given us a good sci-fi story. Who cares? Because that doesn't tell us anything about the real world. Like I said, my problem with Bostrom isn't that he read too much sci-fi. It's too much bad sci-fi. I wish he had read more Ursula Le Guin or, you know, Gene Wolfe or modern writers Ted Chiang, but you guys aren't paying to listen to me talk about sci-fi because I could do that a lot, right? But anyway, I think the best answer to someone like Le Guin and the objection she's making here is just say, weird case. Seems like there's magic in this world. There's not magic in the real world. In the real world, torturing a child is not going to have the best consequences. Now, even that, you might think that's kind of a weird answer, utilitarians. The reason not to torture a child is not because, well, probably it's going to have bad consequences. Seems a little complicated. A lot of us would just say, you don't torture a child because that's wrong. They're innocent. They're a human being. You can't do that to them, right? We will come back to this. But you can look in the real world and you can see how utilitarianism all too easily justifies immoral, shady actions. This will be a theme that I keep coming back to, especially when we talk about, say, utilitarianism, what it says about the issue of war. But we can already see this in the New Yorker article I gave you guys when we talk about McCaskill, right? Now, who's McCaskill friends with? Lots of people, but you guys might have, if you follow the news, have noticed one name here who pops up in a big way. Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, right? Now, I won't get into it because it's financial crime, and financial crime is always boring. It's a joke. It's one of the reasons I think people don't think about it enough. But, Sam Bankman-Fried is, in this article, they talk about him like he's the second coming. Some things happened a couple months later, and it turned out he was just a fraudster, right? Now, the thing is, a lot of people knew that Sam Bankman-Fried wasn't on the up and up for a long time, and there are records where people within the effective altruism movement went to McCaskill and are like, this guy's a fraudster. You need to disassociate yourself from him. This is going to be bad, right? And McCaskill basically shushed them and kind of did the classic manager thing of like, thanks for bringing this to my attention, and then ignored it, right? And if you are McCaskill, it is far too easy to justify this in good utilitarian terms, right? Maybe Bankman-Fried is shady, maybe he's not, but even if he's shady, we're getting his money where we can do all this good with it, right? It is not only good for me, but it is morally right to shut these people up and make sure the Sam Bankman-Fried money spigot stays open, right? Notice, I'm listening to this really good book by Gary Wills on Nixon, and, he talks about, Wills says, politicians are very, very good. He's not just condemning Nixon, he's talking about Johnson and Humphrey and all these guys. He's like, they're very, very good at convincing themselves that what's good for them is good for everyone and not just good for everyone, but therefore a moral requirement, right? And I don't think it's just politicians. I think it's anybody in a position of authority. And I think you can see McCaskill doing this, right? It's good for me to keep the Bankman-Fried money open. Utilitarianism very easily lets himself tell himself a story where it's good for everybody. Not just good for us, but all of our poor, unborn future descendants, right? I don't think McCaskill is consciously a scoundrel. I'm not sure I would say the same for Bostrom. Do some Googling, he seems like a bad guy, right? But I think at least McCaskill is principled. And he means well. But all of us are prone, I think, to some self-deception. And it seems like his utilitarian theory makes it way too easy to do that. Or think about even in the article. In the article, some of these disgruntled effective altruists, these people who are mad about the direction, that Bostrom and Beckstead and McCaskill have taken us to where we're worrying about far off future people and robot apocalypse instead of worrying about starving people half a world away, as the way the movement started. These people tell the author he will happily lie to you if he thinks it creates more happiness. And this is not something about a character flaw in McCaskill. As I said, I think he means well. You guys might have gathered I don't agree with him. I'm not an effective altruist. I'm not a utilitarian. But I will grant that he means well. But if you are a good utilitarian, if you do your little utility calculation in your head and it says lie to this person will create more happiness, then you should lie, right? And if you're McCaskill and you've convinced yourself the very future hinges on what we do now, whether we have enough money to prevent this bad stuff I think's coming down the pike, it is very, very easy to tell yourself that lying to preserve or help your movement is the thing you ought to do and is not just excusable, but is morally required, right? So this is not a quirk of McCaskill. This is just utilitarianism and expected utility theory applied consistently. All of this comes back to Thrasymachus's worry, maybe a slightly different one, but one very much in the neighborhood. How did effective altruists get to be so obsessed with things like the robot apocalypse when they started with these more grounded worries about world hunger or healthcare in faraway places? And there's a story they want to tell where it's just like, we did the math, man, we just followed the numbers. Which again, maybe they did. These guys are better at math than I am. But the problem is, do the numbers you plugged into your equations, do they actually track reality, right? There's another story to tell. How did they become so interested, so obsessed with this stuff? That I think, to me at least, is a bit more plausible. Maybe I'm wrong. And it's a lot less flattering, right? Who is giving them money? Silicon Valley types, right? If you are a Silicon Valley type, what do you know a lot about? Computers. What are you going to worry about? Computer things, right? Notice, too, the role that this story gives these Silicon Valley types in the grand drama, right? We need to worry about the robot apocalypse, right? We might get bad robots and then apocalypse, or we might get good robots that basically do everything for us. I don't think I'm being too polemical to say it's like robot devil or robot Jesus, and we get to decide which. Well, it gives the Silicon Valley types, you want the robot messiah and not the robot devil. It gives the Silicon Valley types a grand role to play in this drama. And utilitarianism, this is Thrasymachus's worry, slightly more subtle. Here are people who are powerful, who are in charge, crafting a moral theory that does seem like it's just controlling or fooling people who should know better, right? You have all these bright young people who are like, well, I don't know, it seems like maybe it's bad that Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg has all this money. Doesn't seem like it's maximizing happiness. But the bright people in effective altruism tell me we should be worried about the robot apocalypse, and these guys know a lot about it, so we need to let them keep their money. Now, that's overly cynical, and I might be being a little simplistic, but you can see Thrasymachus's worry here. And I don't think that every moral theory is like this, but I do think it's a danger, and it seems like utilitarianism might be especially prone to it because we can plug in numbers that let us tell ourselves what we want to hear or what is very nice for us to hear. If you're giving money to William McCaskill, you want to be the hero in your drama. If you're McCaskill, you don't want to have to take a principled stand and turn money down from SBF. What's more, you don't want to have to push back on these people who are funding you and say, well, actually, no. I know that you really are into robot apocalypse because you read a lot of sci-fi when you're a kid, but really deworming and immunizations are the things we should be worried about. And you can see a psychological process here where you tell yourselves, it's like, well, I don't know, the guys funding us, they seem to be worried about robot apocalypse. Well, maybe it's a thing. Far future, long odds. And I worry that utilitarianism makes that too easy to do. If you think that McCaskill and the effective altruists are more than a bit silly, and I should say the long-termist branch of effective altruism, I have more grudging but more respect for the other wing of it, the Singer wing. If you think they're kind of silly, then I think I tend to agree with you, but I think this is a case study in how utilitarianism might lead us wrong. Anyway, in the next series of lectures, I'm going to talk about John Stuart Mill. He has a slightly different way of applying utilitarianism, and he tries to deal with both some of the objections I'm leveling, and I think he gives us a more plausible picture than you might get from someone like McCaskill or Bostrom, but I'm still going to push and say there are some problems with it.